Meta AI is the personal AI to help you with whatever you need. Plus, it meets you where you are. Not only is Meta AI now an app, but it's also on the apps you already know and love: Facebook, Instagram, WhatsApp, and Messenger. Plus the Ray-Ban Meta glasses. It's easy to access wherever you are. So whether you're talking or texting, Meta AI is convenient to use throughout your day. Experience our newest AI that's tailored to you by downloading the Meta AI app. Try the Meta AI app today on the Apple App Store and Google Play.
This podcast is brought to you by TeamTrade, a digital solution that helps you hire, optimize, and retain employees. Using psychometric assessments to identify more than 100 professional mindset traits, it gives instant reports you can use to build high-performing teams. Get 2 free profiles today, no commitment, no credit card required, at teamtrait.com. TeamTrait.com. Welcome to the Manage Smarter podcast with hosts C. Lee Smith and Audrey Strong. We're glad you're here for discussions on new ways to manage smarter, hire, develop, and retain talent, improve results, and propel team performance to new heights. This is the Manage Smarter podcast.
Our guest today, Lee, is an executive coach and author and a leadership thought leader who says building teams is actually harder than rocket science. And to be honest, thinking back on my career, I tend to believe him when I think about it.
What's interesting about that is that every person that's involved in the team, every player on the team is its own variable. And not only that, it's like what you get from that variable, that person every single day can vary based on what's going on in their family life, what's going on in their work life, any other external pressures or anything like that. I mean, even to the point of how bad traffic was that morning. So the fact that you've got all these things that vary not only from person to person, but from day to day, I can actually believe that it is actually that hard.
Well, welcome to Manage Smarter, everyone. My name is Audrey Strong. I'm Senior Vice President of Communications here at Sales Fuel.
And I'm C. Lee Smith. I am the CEO and founder of Sales Fuel.
So this is a 3-book set of workbooks. James says, don't just read them and throw them on the shelf. He wants these to be working workbooks, and they're incredibly detailed. James Scouller is our guest today. He's an ex-CEO who's been coaching leaders and their teams for 20 years, released a trilogy of books titled How to Build Winning Teams Again and Again. And he says they're the 3 books he wished he'd read 40 years ago. And the first series of hard books to explain the psychology, action principles, and roadmaps behind team success. So book 1 explains what you need to know about teams and their psychology. Book 2 outlines what you need to do to nail the psychological issues explained in book 1. And then 3 explains how to apply the models in book number 2. James, welcome. What an amazing feat. Boy, you said you could have put it all into one book, but then you broke it out.
Yeah. It's such a feat that my wife has said, never again. That is your last book. That's the last book you're going to write.
Well, okay. You talk about real teams. You say the most senior management struggle to become real teams. I want to know, what is the word real team? What's your definition of that?
Well, I use the word real to distinguish between a genuine team and a not so genuine team, because I think in business, we throw the word team around far too casually. Sometimes we'll refer to a sales team, when in my view, it's not a team. We'll sometimes call the whole company a team. It's too casual. So I use the word real team to say, I do genuinely mean a real team, and a real team has certain characteristics that distinguish it from other kinds of work groups.
Okay, what are those?
Yeah, they don't compete against each other.
Well, the principal alternative work group is quite helpful to define a team by explaining what it's not. So the most common work group you will see, and this is particularly true at senior level, is what I call a performance group. So a performance group has a hub, and the senior person is the hub. And then you've got these spokes out to the different members. And most of the work is done along those spokes between the leader and the individual members. So if it was a top team, sales director, manufacturing director, and so forth. And the sum total of these individual efforts is enough to achieve whatever it is they're trying to achieve. So in fact, a so-called sales team is very often an example of a performance group. If you add together the results of the individual sales representatives in their regions or territories, that's enough to achieve the goal. That's a performance group. A real team is different because it's realized that whatever challenge it's taking on, it cannot do it by simply totaling up the individual efforts. They've got to create something together, or they've got to solve a problem together, or they've got to execute together, or they've got to do all three. Otherwise, the challenge, whatever it is, won't be achieved. And then they've got to apply certain disciplines around that. But that's what makes a team and makes it distinguishable from a performance group.
Interesting. Lee, you're a behavioral analyst, and he's very trained in profiles and psychology as well. James, Lee, do you think the psychology behind our teams here at Sales Fuel is sound? And when you look at our teams here, what are your thoughts? I think we have very well-functioning teams, actually.
Yeah, well, and of course, James, there's a question for you. It's like I want to talk about cross-functional teams. All right, so what's your advice for that?
Well, my advice for a cross-functional team is pretty much the same as it would be for any would-be real team. My first bit of advice would be know what you're basically for. The French call it the raison d'être, the reason for being.
Mm-hmm.
And you might be surprised that there are teams that haven't actually answered that question. So I can give you an example of one. There was one group I had to coach. We're talking about running $1 billion business. And they had been formed following a merger. And so you had a division above brand businesses, about 5 brand businesses. And this divisional group had never actually figured out what they were for. Now, this sounds abstract and philosophical, but for example, and very expensive consultants have been involved, very famous ones. They hadn't figured out, keep it simple. Were they there to run the businesses and the brand CEOs basically to be their messengers? Or were they there to create the conditions for the brand businesses to prosper and be more culture building? They'd never figured that out, and they got caught in an uneasy, neither this nor that sort of fiasco situation. And that made it very difficult for them to get anything done. That doesn't usually happen. So get that clear, then get your number one goal clear. What's the biggest single thing you've got to get done in certainly less than 12 months that matters to you all? And back that up with a compelling emotional message and metrics and targets, no more than 2 or 3 metrics, and make it specific. So everybody's clear, it's not ambiguous, and everybody gives a damn about it. The second big thing I would say is then make sure you have got the right blend of people. It's very easy, again, I'll go to senior team level, to appoint the sales chief, the manufacturing chief, the finance chief, and think, there's the blend I need because they're the heads of departments or what have you, or the heads of region. And I'm going to use a European sports analogy here because I don't know baseball, American football, and your big sports well enough. But I suspect you'll know enough about what we call football, soccer well enough to know.
Columbus Crew, baby, all the way, MLS champions.
Well, you wouldn't want 11 goalkeepers trotting out of the changing rooms and taking up a position in the nets. But that is precisely what you can get if you choose on job titles alone. So there are certain mindsets and team roles that research shows you must have. For example, you need somebody who's very good at coming up with creative solutions to tough problems, sometimes out-of-the-box solutions. You need somebody who's very good at taking those solutions and saying, okay, so we do that, and then that, and then that, and we need to get those missing resources, and X needs to do that. A couple of other examples. You usually need somebody who's good at pouring oil on troubled waters, somebody who's very good at diffusing unhelpful conflict through their popularity, and they're seen as fair, objective people. And you definitely need somebody who's very good at saying, just hang on a minute. What are the pitfalls of that particular idea? Could we end up all going over the cliff like a bunch of lemmings? So there are 8 clear team roles, behavior clusters that research shows, and you want to make sure you've got as many of those. There are a few other things, but those will be my 2 first bits of advice. Get your goal clear and then get your mix in good shape.
The other thing that I notice is that people don't understand their own team identity. So what is it that makes our team special once a team has been formed? And I'll give you a couple examples of that I've experienced recently. I'm working with one sales team, and they're looking to say, okay, we want more people that are like our very best performers. And they list off some things in which they think are the best performers. And then when I get under the hood or whatever, I realize that all your best performers are mavericks. Did you realize that? No, I had no idea. Well, like that's what the identity of your team is that you're a team full of mavericks, which is great. So use that to your advantage. I had another team recently that is like that was very alternative financial services company, and they think differently. They do different things, and of course, and they went down through the whole sales team and kind of say, okay, we need somebody that can prospect well, that can handle objections, blah 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 blah. Well, that's pretty much every sales team. And once I got under the hood there or whatever, then I realized that you need the strength of your team is that you're alternative thinkers. You don't think like normal people. And that's great because you're not a normal company. You're an alternative company. So instead of going through and just doing the basic sales functions and everything like that, realize the identity of your team is that, and now let's make that work to your advantage. And yet, so many people that I work with don't understand their team identity. And I'll use the sports analogy there too. Every sports team has to have an identity. Oh, we're going to be hard to play against, or we're going to be stout on defense, or we're going to constantly attack, or we're going to maintain possession of the ball, at least 60% of the game, or that sort of thing. And I think the same thing applies here. How do you feel about that?
Yeah, well, Lee, you are correct. It is something that is rarely talked about explicitly in business, in my experience, at any level in a company. I would say in team sport, it wasn't talked about that much until around 15, 16 years ago. A guy wrote a very interesting book around the New Zealand rugby union team. They're known as the All Blacks. Mm-hmm. And this is a nation with only about 4 million people, remember, and they've won the Rugby World Cup more than any other country, I think. They can have an incredible win rate, but they ran into difficulty some 20 years ago, and they did a kind of reset, and that was all around identity, who we are, and therefore who we'll pick and how we'll train. So when I coach teams now, when we talk about this, I give them a model and say, think about your story, which is I'm going to have to remember the 4 elements of it now. It's partly to do with your identity, who we are and what's distinctive about that, what you're capable of, because they often think they're not capable of something, and that's the problem. What do we care about most? Our values. So identity, values, capability, and I've got to miss one. I can't think what it is actually, but there are four elements to it, and we hammer that out if necessary. And from that comes that sense of uniqueness. Oh, sorry. The 4th is purpose. That's what it is. What's our purpose? So purpose, identity, values, and capability. And you will find examples of sports teams that have a very powerful negative capability belief that they haven't worked on. And that can cripple. And that's true, I think, of the England football team until about 2016. Because they concentrated on tactics and selection. Mm-hmm. And I don't think they got down to the deeper group psychology. The current manager has actually, and it's made a big difference to results in the last 8 years.
And your goalkeeping sucks. And your goalkeeping oh, well.
What is your dual forces model? I saw the graphic of that and thought that was very interesting. Explain that.
Yeah, well, I'll do it very sort of quickly because there is quite a lot of depth to it.
Yes.
One of the points I make early on in the book is that teams don't form naturally or easily. If they do, it's incredibly rare. Why? Because there's a lot of subterranean psychological stuff going on below the surface. So I created that model really only to make one point, that this stuff is going on. I want you to understand it. And once you've understood it, my point stands that this is what is making it more difficult to form teams naturally. So the dual forces model says, let's say there are 8 members of a team. You've got individual forces flowing from each person. Most of us have negative beliefs around who we are, like I'm not good enough. Boy, is that common. Mm-hmm. Or I'm insignificant. Nobody's going to listen to me. Or I'm good at what I do, but I'm a ruthless person. So I'd better not get tough with people. Otherwise, they'll think I'm horrible, and then I'll be reminded. And that drives us into negative behaviors. We may also have negative worldview beliefs, like You can't trust anybody here. So if you tell the truth or you say what you're really thinking, they'll savage you. They're a bunch of wolves.
Mm-hmm.
The point is, we've got all these individual beliefs that we defend ourselves against. We develop defensive behaviors. And what that does is drive us into behaviors that make team formation very difficult. Now, at the same time, coming up from the individual level, there's what I call the collective forces. So what I just described, identity, purpose, capability, values, that combines to create a story of who we are. And that always emerges. Whether we do it consciously or unconsciously, something emerges. It could be rather bland. It could be very edgy, but it emerges. But here's the weird thing. We've unconsciously created it. But if you go back to the story of Dr. Frankenstein and his monster, he creates this monster. He thinks he's in control, but eventually the monster takes control of him. And that's exactly what we create with the collective force. This becomes like a living entity because a team is a living system, and it presses in and it makes the members want to conform with the story. So, for example, the Catholic Church in my country and elsewhere in Europe got itself into big trouble with abuse of young parishioners. Mm-hmm. And then they went into denial. This was the collective force at work. Now, you can see versions of that in smaller units like teams. The point is, you've got the individual forces, you've got the collective forces, and in between, you've got what I've called the combustion chamber, the emotional combustion chamber. And you've basically got a subconscious hothouse of colliding forces. And that all makes it very tough to form a team unless you know what's going on and you can find a way of directing these forces.
So this is Manage Smarter, and you wrote a chapter in your first book about senior teams. I'd like you to talk a little bit more about how senior teams differ from every other team and some of the unique challenges that they face.
Well, what's unique about them is they find it harder, in my experience, so others may have different experience, but my experience is it is tougher for senior teams to form than project teams or more junior teams. Why? Well, simply put, because they find it really tough to apply the disciplines of teams. And if you then say, yeah, but why is that, James? Well, in the book, this is book 1, I've drawn a kind of pyramid with 5 levels to it. And the base level is what I call ignorance. Most senior people, but to be fair to them, this was true of me several years ago, they're ignorant of what a real team looks like or how it contrasts with a performance group. So when they hear the word team, they typically think performance group, hub and spokes model, dominant leader at the center. So straight away, that is making it less likely for a team to perform. Then at the next level up, you've got a lot of unspoken presuppositions at senior level, like teams are a waste of time. You end up in pointless, unproductive, time-wasting, bickering meetings. It's much better to pin accountability on one person than you know who to chase, things like that. Again, can you see how that's making a team formation less likely and a performance group more likely? Then at the next level, you've got the fact that these are rather egotistical people. Mm-hmm. They're used to running the show, understandably. They're not used to being challenged by a peer. Their boss, yes, but not a peer. So that makes them rather reluctant to get into conflict, more likely to go into a standoff.
They're motivated by power and really don't want to relinquish that power too.
Yes, exactly so, or their autonomy, which takes you to the 4th layer up, the psychological risk. Being egocentric, I am simplifying here because there obviously are exceptions. They're particularly afraid of, I've learned 2 things, conflict and losing their autonomy. These people are used to, ruling the roost, understandably, running their department or running a business or a whole division. And so the idea of conflict or being challenged by a boss is okay, by a peer, not so much. So you can often find it's a bit like gangland bosses meeting and saying, okay, I won't invade your territory if you don't invade mine. You can get this silent standoff. That absolutely makes a team impossible to form because you need that sort of honesty in the room. And then you top that off at the top level with the fact that you often find at a senior team, they haven't figured out their unique goal. They usually conflate it with the organization. So if the organization's goal is grow profits by 10%, they'll just assume, well, that's our goal. They don't ask themselves, okay, if that's what the organization needs, what do we as a group of 8 people or 7 people, what do we have to contribute to make that more likely? You put all those things together and it makes it just very unlikely that you're going to see anything other than a performance group at senior level.
You use the term pseudo team. Is that referring to a performance group that's masquerading as a real team, or does that mean something else?
Yes, I'm afraid it means something else. It's a terrible sort of quicksand-like trap. A pseudo team is a work group that decides that it wants to be a team, it needs to be a team, it's the 21st century, teams are good, you always need a team, but they haven't figured out their number one goal and then looked at it and said, oh yeah, that really needs us to combine our know-how and time and effort. They've just said, teams are what you need to be.
And let's have a bunch of meetings.
Well, yeah, well, and then what becomes, they assume that teams are just about teamwork. And what I mean by that is a bunch of supportive behaviors, like listening supportively, building on other people's ideas, trying to be empathetic and so forth. And those are very helpful to team formation, no question of it. But the pseudo team puts all its efforts into being civil with each other and nice with each other and friendly, because unity, harmony, unanimity is the number one thing for them. So they may have been a quite capable performance group, but now they're focusing on unanimity. And what eventually happens is the meetings do become boring. They take their eye off the goal. The performance edge starts to dip. That's when you see the finger pointing and the blaming and the scapegoating. And unfortunately, it often gives teams a rather bad name, because a lot of people think, well, that's what teams are. But no, those are pseudo teams.
So is it your belief then that conflict is a natural part of any high-performing team?
Yes, I do. I can give you an example of where, if you wish, of where that didn't happen and it sunk them. Would that be useful?
I would love that.
Yeah.
I'd love to hear that.
So this was a senior group. They'd been formed from a series of mergers, and they're the same group that I was describing a little bit earlier. They didn't actually know their basic purpose. So they asked me to coach them. So I interviewed each of the people individually. And in the first 20 minutes of these private one-to-one interviews, they were telling me how thrilled they were with how friendly they were, how civil they were, how much fun they had together, etc., etc., etc. But as I dug further, what quickly came out was how frustrated they were at the decisions they weren't making, or the decisions they'd apparently made but they weren't acting on. It was driving them nuts, but they weren't talking about it. They weren't talking about it. But when I talked to their direct reports were criticizing them as a unit. So they carried on like this. And unfortunately, for a long while, the organization results were great because of previous brand momentum. But you can guess what happens. Engagement starts slipping, results start slipping. Eventually, about half of them were either fired or reassigned, because they weren't saying, nobody was saying, I am cheesed off with the lack of decision-making and commitment to decisions around here, and basically almost banging their fist on the table. That would have been incredibly constructive, but they stayed in pseudo-team mode.
I love it. It's a whole new way.
A wild elephant in a room can do a lot of damage, right?
Yeah, just a bull in a china shop.
Yeah.
We've got about a minute left. Would you like to tell first of all, I love all of this. It's really turning everything I thought a team was and kind of turning it on its head for me. You've got a website for our listeners to help them sort through. It's a lot. This is a lot of content, James, to help them sort through it and some things that they can do, and then reaching out to you. Go ahead and.
Yeah. So the website is leadershipmasterysuite.com, leadershipmasterysuite.com, suite spelled SUITE. And if they go leadershipmasterysuite.com/MS for Manage Smarter, they'll go to a private page where I've offered 3 sets of tools or resources for them to use. These are taken from the book, or one of them is taken from the book. One of them is unique to you, and you can use it to assess your team or improve your team building skills. Or if you have a chat with me, you can. But that's for your listeners to go to. So that's leadershipmasterysuite.com/MS. And the book is How to Build Winning Teams Again and Again, or rather the trilogy, is
The
that.
books, plural.
The books.
Yes.
Yeah.
Thank you, James. Oh, go
I
ahead.
have one final question for James, just because I just, based on an earlier comment, I really want to know this. Who's your favorite club, football club?
Oh, it's Chelsea Football Club. I'm a Chelsea man.
Oh, boy, that's a rough, you're having a rough year.
We are having a rough year. Yeah.
I love that you guys are both, well, I call it soccer, but
Yeah,
yes,
I'm a Villa
football.
fan myself. I've been with Villa it's been more thin than thick. I'll tell you that. But
Yeah, well, it's
this year's
pretty
been
thick.
good.
It's pretty thick this year.
Pretty thick this year. Yeah.
Yeah,
It's a
yeah.
good year.
Yeah.
Here's the better seasons ahead, gentlemen.
Yeah. Thank you.
Thanks, James.
Thanks for listening. If you enjoyed the show, please rate and recommend on iTunes, Overcast, or wherever you get your podcasts. You can also get more great information at salesfuel.com.
This podcast is a part of the C-Suite Radio Network. For more top business podcasts, visit c-suiteradio.com.